Good morning, and thank you all for coming. My name is Paul Steimers. I'm a partner at K&L Gates, a global law firm that represents several of the members of these coalition, the Coalition for Small Business Innovators. Here to have a conversation this morning about what's different about an innovative small business and how the tax code can help make small business innovators' lives easier, help lead to more innovation, more job creation, more economic development throughout the United States and beyond. So with that, I'd like to turn to the panel to let them introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about why they're here, and we'll begin our conversation.
Hi, I'm Doug Doerfler. I'm founder, president, and CEO of a company named MaxCyte. We're located in Gaithersburg, Maryland. We've been in business since 1999, and we're developing a basic technology that we licensed from a university in 1999 to modify cells, and those cells are being developed as a treatment for cancer. So we've been at this for a number of years and very interested in this whole space of innovation and what policies we can put in place and legislation to support the earliest of our companies.
Thanks. I'm Katherine Hamilton. I'm the policy director for the Electricity Storage Association. Electricity storage is essentially being able to bottle energy, as we say, lightning in a bottle. Bottle energy so you don't have to use it the moment it's generated and be able to use it when you want it at the price you need it. A lot of our companies are startups, innovators. They are essentially prepared to innovate for the United States. These are jobs in the U.S. and manufacturing in the U.S. Most of them have started with grants from Department of Defense, Department of Energy. They've done pilot projects, and then they slam into the valley of death because what they really need is investors to come to the table for long-term investment. And so they're looking at how do we spur this investment and drive down risk? And some of these proposals are going to really help do that. We became part of this Coalition for Small Business Innovation. There are 21 companies that are cross-sector. You'll notice most of these folks are not doing energy, but we all have the same issues in innovation. We're looking at long-term growth, trying to spur the U.S. economy, and trying to go from early-stage capital and pilot programs to really long-term investment.
Wow. My name is Ed Mathers. I'm a partner with New Enterprise Associates. A little bit about me. I've been in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology industry since probably 1982. So I've been, my life has been spent in what I would characterize in an innovation industry. So I've been on the operating side of the world and seen how the need for capital is so critical for the lifeblood of this industry, and I'm sure we're going to get into a little bit about that discussion. New Enterprise Associates, NEA, we're a venture capital firm. We're probably one of the largest VCs in the world. We're investing out of our 14th fund. We are a multi-specialty fund, so we invest from anywhere from startup clean tech type companies, whether it's companies such as O-Power, wind energy, anything about electricity redistribution on the grid, to biotech, medical devices, medical services, you name it, that's what we do for a living. I mean, the key thing for us is we start companies from scratch. I mean, that's where we focus on. We like to build companies, but we also, as a result of building companies, we need access to additional capital because invariably a venture-backed company might run into the valley of death, as you called it, and that's where the additional capital is critical to get people through the valley of death.
And I'm Darrell West. I'm Vice President of Governance Studies at the Brookings Institution, and I also direct our Center for Technology Innovation, which we launched 3 years ago. We focus on many different aspects of innovation. We're very interested in what we can do to facilitate innovation, have public policies that are pro-innovation, and have a tax code that enables innovation as well. So we work in a lot of different areas, digital technology, mobile technology, biotech, medical devices. We've launched a new project on the use of domestic drones. We love the Jeff Bezos 60 Minutes interview, trying to promote drone delivery of Amazon products. So at Brookings, we undertake research on many different aspects of innovation. All of our reports are free and available online at brookings.edu, so feel free to check it out.
Thank you. Well, let's start with the question, how are small R&D companies different from ordinary small businesses, your average mom and pop grocery store or something like that?
Well, I can tell you a little bit about what we've done. We licensed some technology from a major university in 1999, a patent, and in the patent it was reduced to practice. In the patent office's mind, not reduce the practice from a commercial perspective. And so we spent the first 5 years and raised $10 million through ex-friends and family, I like to call it, the Angel Network, to create this proof of concept, two working prototypes. So that was 5 years and about $10 million. And then we finally were able to convince venture capitalists, his brother, not his firm, but groups like his firm, to invest about $25 to $30 million into our company. And for the last 10 years, we've been taking the product to a more commercial proof of concept so we could begin to initiate clinical studies. And so we're just to the point after 15 years and $30–40 million with that's all losses, so that's not revenues, and we're just funding into a point where the revenue and expense lines are crossing. So from our perspective, we've invested quite a bit of money in this technology pre-revenue, and now the next step is to find additional investment to take this into the clinic and go after some very important cancer targets. So it's very different because either in big company R&D or in a mom and pop shop, you're not usually in a situation where you're actually investing money and not having any return for 5, 10, 15 years.
And if I could ask you to elaborate just a little bit, that's very clearly a challenge in terms of the cost and the time. Can you go in a little bit more detail as to the kinds of benefits in terms of cancer treatment you're talking about?
So the work we're doing is being pioneered by the University of Pennsylvania, and it's taking T cells, which are your body's natural killing machine, if you will, your immune system, and we're arming them with our technology to be very specific against certain types of cancer, both solid tumors and the not only is the innovation in the technology, but it's also in the approach. And one of the things that I'm really interested in is the word innovation. And innovation isn't invention. Innovation is actually being able to do something that you can only imagine could happen. Things like making HIV/AIDS a treatable disease or cancer a treatable disease. These are things that one can only imagine 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. And that's what real innovation is, really changing the way people think about their lives.
Yeah, Paul, I think the key here is, as you said, the word innovation. Because with a typical small business that has a widget or a service to sell, the innovation's been done. There is something that they're selling that's already in the marketplace and has already gone through the development cycle. What we're talking about is intellectual property that's developed here in the United States that can create jobs here in the U.S. that we could, at least in the energy storage side, could easily lose it to other countries that are really putting a lot of funding into developing and investing. And innovators have a very different cycle of development than a typical small business that would have something already innovated that they're trying to sell.
I mean, from our point of view, we wouldn't see the typical small business, the mom and pop, because they're not really coming in to look for capital. Usually they're already generating revenue, and they're operating in a very important part of our society. The innovators who come into us, the typical R&D type innovators, as you heard from Doug, they're a 10, 15-year road of which they're just digging a hole, spending money on the R&D point of view. But it's very important, and as a result, I mean, those people are the ones who come to us because they're the ones who need the capital the most. And it's a meandering road too, because you might go this way with your original plan, but then you find out, well, it's all wrong. So you're $30 million in a hole already, but now you've learned something, so you innovate and you go this way a little bit. So it's totally different. I mean, the R&D side of the equation is we don't talk about P&Ls usually. We just talk about Ls.
So that brings me to the question. We hear a lot about the research and development tax credit, which is designed, of course, to support innovative research. Won't the research and development tax credit take care of this kind of innovation?
The existing tax credit?
Yes.
So the existing tax credit is helpful if you're paying taxes, which means you have to be making money. And innovative companies early in their cycle, they're not making money, and so there's no benefit of having the R&D tax credit. So it really doesn't help pre-revenue companies in my mind.
So your company, for example, is not able to take advantage of the R&D tax
No,
credit?
because we can't use the credit against our tax obligations.
Ed, do you see any of your companies taking advantage of the credit?
No, because, again, similar to Doug's point, I mean, it's rare that we actually get to companies that are revenue generating. I mean, we'd like to get there, but 90% on the biotech side of the business, and I'm not talking the tech side of the business, 90 to 95% of the companies are pre-revenue.
So if that's the case, and given what you said, Ed, about the challenges associated with not quite being sure where your development path is going to lead you, why should Congress step in and provide ways to support companies that are so early on their path?
Well, I mean, it's really a simple decision. I mean, if we want to maintain being a world leader in innovation and technology development and continue to lead the world on cutting edge therapies, as Doug's talking about here, he mentioned HIV back in the 80s. No one thought that HIV would be a treatable disease like diabetes. It is now treatable. You're starting to see certain cancer therapies, melanoma, for instance, not too long ago, was a death sentence. Now there are at least four approved drugs on the market for melanoma or in development and in the approval process. So it's these types of things that if people were not innovating, we would not be able to see. And if Congress doesn't step in and adjust the tax situation, I mean, I think it's just not a good situation for long term.
Dr. West, how do you see the gap between the R&D tax credit and what we need being resolved?
Certainly with the pre-revenue companies, the tax code has enormous ramifications for those companies in terms of their ability to innovate. I mean, the tax code is now more than 70,000 pages long. When you add up all of the deductions from the taxes that people pay, it's now almost $1 trillion, and so the deductions are almost as much as the total revenue that's coming in. And so when you think about the impact on the range of companies who work in education, in healthcare, alternative energy, the mobile sector, the ramifications of that tax code are just enormous. And so making permanent the R&D tax credit is important, but that alone is not going to solve the problem. Like having tax reform that is pro-innovation is absolutely crucial for these small firms to do well in the future.
Right, and if we don't invest as a country, someone else will. I mean, I would say China's just a few months behind us on the energy storage side, and we want to keep it here. We want to spur manufacturing here, and the only way we can do that is to support our innovators.
Will that be enough? That is it possible for the United States to maintain its role as an innovation leader, even if we do take measures to support innovators through tax reform?
I would never bet against the U.S., frankly. I've been to China and Korea. Both countries have very aggressive investments in supporting innovative industries. You go there, and the scientists that are there that are driving that work are folks who have been here and have gone back to the country to try to take back what they've learned here through the culture, through the way we do what we do. So I do think that, and we're doing it differently. We're not. The bill we're talking about here is not around asking for grants. It's not about direct investment. It's about supporting the problem we're having is, and I think the problem in this sector is, we're trying to find investors to invest in our company. What we're trying to do is make it attractive for them to invest in a company that's got a 15-year cycle before it turns positive, that's going after major issues, versus an alternative investment that an investor has for a new app that could be turned around in 6 months, and the return is attractive, and they'd rather divert their money to that. So I think what we're trying to do here is incentivize the investor to take the risk in investing in the country, in the companies.
And, as an investor in a partnership that invests both in tech and in healthcare, I mean, that is a constant debate. I mean, where are you going to allocate your money? And are we better off putting it in the app development company, which is, they do wonderful things and can get quicker returns. But at the same time, from the healthcare point of view, is the returns from an investor, solely from an investor point of view, take a lot longer, but could be more outsized too, but it takes a lot of patience.
So if we're looking for ways to incentivize more investment, does the tax approach leverage private investment, or is it essentially a one-to-one dollar lost per investment dollar gained?
A couple points. One is that some of the big problems we're facing in healthcare are potentially problems that we can solve. And that's diabetes and problems with hepatitis, some of these really serious disease, pandemic, influenza, things that really do keep people up at night, both from a public health perspective and from a personal perspective. This, at least the biotech industry, had done this before. In the early 80s, when Ed and I first got into the business, there were these R&D tax partnerships. And these R&D tax partnerships allowed investors to take losses against, active losses against passive, take their deductions against their income based on passive losses. And these companies, the real big companies in the biotech sector, the name brands, Amgen, Genentech, Genzyme, all these companies finance their projects through these R&D tax partnerships. So this is something that isn't an unproven idea. This is something that actually worked, and it worked very, very well, and was really the catalyst for our industry. And what we're trying to do is figuring out a way of bringing it back, because it worked so well, and it was taken away during the tax reforms back in the mid-80s.
Yeah, and this particular Startup Jobs and Innovation Act that creates these R&D partnerships is estimated to stimulate over $10 billion of investment and create 156,000 jobs or something. And then there are other things that you cannot even put a dollar figure on, because they have such broad ability to change the way we live.
Dr. West, can you explain a little bit more about how these partnerships work?
I mean, I think these partnerships are vital, especially for these new emerging companies, just because it's the route by which they're able to finance their innovation. And with these small companies, it's like, they're so close to the edge that they need help. And when you look at what other countries are doing, they're very aggressive at promoting their innovation programs. South Korea, they target particular areas. They're putting a lot of money into biotechnology. They're putting a lot into mobile. They're putting a lot of money into digital technology. And so it's important, even though the United States still does very well on innovation, it's important that we do the investments that are going to allow these companies to continue to do that, because the competitive environment is very difficult when you look at what other countries are doing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that what we see from our competitor countries is often that there's targeted investment in particular fields, as you're saying. And what this opportunity is for something that applies across a wide range of fields to all innovation. The associations that are members of CSBI that I'm involved with range from manufacturing to renewable fuels to space to nanotech to neurotechnology to water. And the idea that all of them could get a benefit from this kind of legislation is I think, really intriguing from a international competitiveness standpoint. What's the outlook for tax reform right now? Is this something that is this an academic discussion at this point, or is there a real opportunity for progress here?
I mean, I would say the political climate certainly is challenging. We all have seen the stories about gridlock in Congress. But the good news about the innovation space is there aren't too many areas too many policy areas that remain either nonpartisan or bipartisan, but innovation actually is, because it's a job creator. Everyone understands that innovation is highly correlated with long-term economic prosperity and job creation and having our economy do well and creating opportunities. So if there is an area where there's a possibility of breaking through the gridlock, this is certainly one of the areas.
I think the challenge is to make it very specific. You know, thinking about the examples I said about HIV, AIDS, and thinking about the problems facing this country, if we can identify those problems in a clear way and show our politicians of how important those problems, when they're solved, will be to the future of our country, and then assemble the companies that are actually involved in trying to solve those problems, and that are in this valley of death or they can't get investment, you realize that our track record's pretty darn good. So if we can figure out ways of spurring investment in the companies that are already trying to solve those problems and giving those examples, I think it will help to make it real and take away the partisanship. I mean, these are problems that all of us are going to face and our children are going to face.
No, that's absolutely right. So whether it's trying to solve issues on the electric grid or trying to solve major medical issues, it touches everybody's life. So everybody, no matter what party you are, you're all impacted by it.
What would you say to policymakers who are on the fence about whether to support this from a fiscal standpoint or just because they're concerned about sort of being out front on this?
The easy advice is they should just look at the numbers in terms of where the jobs are being created in this country, because it is small businesses, it's the emerging markets, that's where the innovation is taking place. When you look at the projections over the next decade of where the job growth is going to come, it's in these sectors. These are going to be, you know, the real 21st century economic drivers. So for members of Congress who are on the fence, they should look within their own districts, they should look in their own states in terms of where the job growth is going to come and what they need to do in order to help facilitate that growth.
Yeah, I don't think there's anyone out there who would argue against job growth. I mean, it's that simple. Whatever party you're in, and I think, again, I think Doug mentioned it earlier. It's not like the tax reform is asking for money, a handout or anything. It's more of just how do you make it more accommodating to the people who are investing the money currently.
One of the issues that we see in the kinds of small businesses that we're talking about, as you've already described, is there may not be a lot of people involved initially, but there's an awful lot of money that goes in. And often we think about small businesses in terms of both a small number of people and a small amount of money. And so a lot of our tax code is written to treat small business as small money. Can you talk about how it would help to address that issue?
Well, if I look at my expense structure, I mean, it's certainly hiring well-paid folks, people who have advanced degrees, people who have invested their own time and money in education. So it's going back into creating jobs. But it's also, you know, we rent space, we buy a lot of equipment, you know, we use a lot of different services. So, you know, this money is really going, from our perspective, into a number of different areas to benefit a lot of different groups within the country. It's not just the employees in the company. In fact, it goes well beyond that.
So I think at this point, we'd be delighted to open the panel up to questions from the audience, and we already have one in the back. I'd ask you please to wait for a microphone and to identify yourself and your affiliation before asking a question. Thank you.
Thanks for having this. My name is Brian Collins. I'm with the Bipartisan Policy Center, and I'd like to make sure I understand kind of how this R&D partnership structure proposal works. So just to put it in context, suppose I were to invest in my friend's brewery, and it's an S corporation. And so in the early years, when they're buying brewing equipment and making lots of investment and probably not much revenue, I'm going to get those operating losses, which I'm going to be able to deduct against my other income. And then in the later years, hopefully the brewery is successful, maybe it's not, but let's assume it's successful, then because it's passed through, the income then gets apportioned among the investors, and I'm going to pay ordinary income tax on that. So with these R&D partnership structures, it seems really clear that in the early years, we're putting money into R&D, investors are able to then deduct those losses against their ordinary income. So let's suppose in the later years, 10 years down the road, let's suppose your innovation is super successful, it's generating lots of sales or royalty income or something. Does some of that income get then apportioned to those partnership structures, and then do those investors pay taxes on that income? How does that work in the long run?
My understanding is yes. I mean, they'll receive, if part of the deal is they get some equity in the company, they're going to get, they're going to be taxed throughout whatever their particular situation is for the taxes, either on the dividend or the capital gains on their investment.
So, but if it's a pass-through entity, there shouldn't be dividend or capital gains. The income for the entity should then be apportioned each year among the investors. So there would be no dividend or capital gains. Just as if the losses are apportioned each year up front, those losses then get deducted against ordinary income.
Yeah, I think one of the issues stems from the amount of R&D that's actually taking place, and there's a limitation, a floor on the amount of R&D that is at 75%. So we can follow up with you on the specifics of that, because you're hitting us with some fairly fine-pointed stuff, but we'll be following up afterward. Appreciate it. Other questions? Yes, microphone's on its way. Thank you.
This is to Ed, is the mic on, about the venture community. Do you feel like you have more incentives now than you did, say, 10 years ago to invest in biotech companies, or fewer? And additionally, do venture capitalists have other ideas outside of this particular idea to encourage innovation specifically in the biotech industry?
I think to answer the first question, right now what you're seeing is actually a shrinking of the venture community focused on early stage biotech investing. They're becoming fewer and fewer VCs. Fortunately for NEA, we're one of the ones, so actually it creates opportunities for NEA because we have the capital. But I'm sure Doug can attest to this, but there are less and less because the returns and the amount of capital required are just not sustainable for some of the VCs who are not as large as NEA. So I think less VC money is going in from that regard. I think from opportunities to create additional innovation, I mean, we're, NEA in particular, we're focused on innovation. So we take the approach that we're not against going into a university lab, finding some unique science, and starting from scratch, whether it's $500,000, because we know, because of the magnitude and size of our fund, that we're willing to put a lot of money to work over a period of time, and we're a little bit more of a patient investor. That makes us unique. I mean, just recently up in the Boston area, we funded what we're calling an orphan accelerator, a company called Sidon. And Sidon, what they're basically doing is they're focused on looking at academia, finding unique projects in academia that, for $500,000, we might be able to get some animal data. And then if we, off of the animal data, we're able to see, create something of value, then we're going to take that animal data and spin it into a new company and create a new company, which then will create new companies in maybe the Boston area or down here, wherever, which then will create new jobs. I think what you're also seeing in the venture community, though, is given some of the issues we're facing and issues pharma is facing. I mean, pharma, for the billions of dollars they make, they are all, they're not cash constrained, they're P&L constrained. I mean, a lot of the pharma companies have billions and billions of dollars sitting on their balance sheets, but they have P&L issues. So pharma and the venture community and the biotech community are looking at, are there alternative ways to project finance? Pharma might have a project that they would like to continue developing, but they can't afford to develop it just because they're P&L constrained. So is there a way to finance that product, working with the venture community and working with the constraints of the tax law. And so there's a lot of thinking going on around that, but that's why these types of the Menendez-Toomey initiative is so important here.
And I think the other thing I would suggest in terms of encouraging biomedical or biotech innovation is there are federal agencies that fund a lot of research at universities. Universities are great at producing new ideas. They're not so great at commercializing those ideas. You have very smart faculty members who need help, not just in terms of raising money, but in figuring out how to market their products, build their companies, and really take their products to market. And so what the National Science Foundation, what NIH, what other funding agencies are starting to do is to offer support not just for the research, but setting up mentoring, coaching clinics. Some universities have established entrepreneurship programs to train faculty and graduate students on how to do this stuff. So I think those are things that the government can do to encourage innovation as well.
And if I could jump on the one point there, the one thing with universities around training people, it used to be publish or perish from a faculty point of view, and you know best, Darrell. But that sometimes would hurt the IP generation because, you know, unless you get your IP secured and your filings, your patent filings, and, you know, there's a disconnect there. So, you know, a lot of academicians we deal with, there's like, well, I already presented that data. Well, then you've also lost the opportunity to actually generate some IP. So that's why it's so important to get these the business schools, the entrepreneurial centers, and the academics together to make sure they understand, because the idea, the discovery is great, but how do you commercialize it is where the key is.
Yeah, I just got a call this week. This is about an energy company, but I got a call this week from one of our innovators who is, it's like the two guys in the garage model that they spun out of university and lab. And he called me and he said, I need to find somebody who can navigate policy. Like, we've got the idea, we know it works, but we need to figure out the best policy solutions. And so that's where they often get hung up. It's in the policy.
Other questions?
Hi, thanks so much for being here this morning. Ed, this question is also directed to you to expand on the last question and your response. My name is Ashley Wallen. I'm with the Advanced Medical Technology Association, or AdvaMed, and we represent the medical device industry. My question is, with what you were saying about the number of VCs investing in the life science asset classes right now, I know JP Morgan's coming up in January, and the number of VCs that I'm meeting with has dropped by another third in the past year, just because they can't raise their next funds. And my question to you is, how much do you foresee these proposals shifting the needle to move some of this investment back into the life science asset classes?
I think and I feel your pain for the medical. I mean, as hard as the biotech side, the biopharm side is, the medical device side is, if not in a tougher space, it's pretty close in terms of you're finding even less VCs doing device investments, and a lot of regulatory reasons there. I mean, on some levels, it's easier to go to Europe to do certain things because of the regulatory environment. But with that being said, I think from our point of view, I don't see any difference really between biopharm and the device side. I mean, these the R&D partnerships that would apply to biopharm would apply equally to the device side. And actually, I think if anything, probably more important to the device side, because there's even less capital going into the device side right now.
And the medical device area is definitely an area where public policy is having a tremendous impact. I mean, as Ed was pointing out, the regulatory issues through FDA. We've done some research on the FDA process, specifically as it relates to medical devices. And as you know, they've put out their guidance document over the last couple months. And so they're trying to codify kind of the three categories of what is subject to regulation, what is not subject, and then the gray areas in between. But still, there are some questions, and we need more clarity.
So I'll just add something. The problem we're having, small companies like MaxCyte, is we're trying to find investors, right? And there's a lot of us out there. What this does, it actually opens up another class of investors that we currently don't have. So it's not just benefiting existing groups that are investing, but catalyzing doctors and lawyers and healthcare professionals who have some passion around a particular area that want to invest in a device company or want to invest in a biopharmaceutical company. That's what this will do. We believe it will help. I believe it's going to help us open up new sources of capital for our companies and bring in new investors that just aren't there today and that would rather go into an app, again, because there's no real benefit. The risk in that is much lower. The payback is much quicker. If we can figure out a way of incentivizing that same money to be directed toward more innovative, bigger problems, which this does, it opens up again more areas of capital to go into the industry.
And this is also an area where other countries are putting a lot of effort into. I was in Beijing a few months ago, and I visited a medical clinic where they have put remote monitoring devices on heart patients. And so they're recording the vital signs. The information is electronically sent back to the clinic. And they have physicians who are monitoring this information in real time, and they find 20 to 30% of the patients have abnormal readings. And so China sees this as a real growth area. The whole mobile medical device area is one they're emphasizing. So the United States has to make sure we have pro-innovation policies because other countries are jumping ahead in these areas.
So I understand that there's bipartisan support for the R&D credit. So what else can Congress do beyond this credit for pre-revenue companies?
Well, another aspect of this bill is my understanding, I'm not an expert in this area, is that it provides the deductibility. I guess there's a 50, the capital gains rate will drop by 50% in a couple of years for smaller companies, right? And we're trying to raise the limit from 50 million to 150 million. So that's another major aspect of this. One thing we don't talk about a lot is NOLs, which are critically important to us. I mean, the one thing that we do have, better or for worse, is we have a lot of net operating losses. And when we finance our companies, when we raise $10 million with angels, that doesn't come in one lump, right? It comes in a series of investments. And when that happens, sometimes it trips the change of ownership requirements and NOLs. We lose those NOLs. And so that asset that we had, and it's a little bit of a perverse asset because it's losses, right? We can't use it because we lose it based on the fact that we keep on tripping the reorganization requirement. I think that's the right word, and we lose the NOLs. So there's a handful of things that we're really focused on changing that will help pre-revenue companies become more successful and retain the assets that we currently have. So it's NOLs, it's helping investors with capital gains, and it's also helping them with deductibility of ordinary income.
You know, I believe in your packet, the coalition has listed some proposals that you may want to look at in more detail.
There was another question in the back.
Hi, Gary Klein with Connect. Just getting down to a more recent level, the House just passed that bill supposedly regulating patent trolls. And we were opposed to it for certain reasons. I think the universities were all opposed to it. And the argument was that it would hurt startups whose only asset really are patents when they're first getting going. So my question is, do you see any implications of that bill or how it can be improved when we go to the Senate, which is actually holding a hearing next week on the same bill?
You know, I think that's an interesting question. I think that's probably the next panel over. But that's certainly a very complicated issue that needs to be examined and addressed. Any thoughts from the rest of the panel? Any other questions? One up here in the front.
Hi, Doug, you made your comment about what this might do for investors, but maybe going down further. Ed and Darrell, from your side, in terms of what your company does, do you see the ability to use losses as a new market for where you might go searching for investors? And then related to that, maybe Darrell, next, from a public policy side, do you see getting, if you will, earlier into the investment time cycle a major advantage economically from your policy point of view at Brookings?
Well, I mean, on the losses side, from our point of view, losses have value, as Doug mentioned. It's just, when do you realize that value? So if there's an opportunity to realize the value sooner, I think you do bring in a different investor class, because right now, from a venture point of view, we acknowledge and accept that we're going to have the losses, and hopefully there's going to be a payout later. That's what we do. There is another group of investors, though, who might be able to take advantage of that lost value right now, but they can't. So I think it brings in a whole new group of people who would jump into the game and then actually continue to spur additional investment.
I guess I would say I see a current problem with public policy is it focuses so much on the revenue-generating companies, and what members of Congress and other people don't realize is there's a lot of innovation occurring in this pre-revenue space of, the other panelists were talking about, sometimes it's a 10, 12, or 15-year time horizon where these companies are refining their innovations, getting their ideas together, not making money, but they're actually producing stuff that is going to make money down the road. And so we need some public policies for those types of companies, because that's where some of the real creativity is emerging now.
Another question in the back. Thank you.
Hi, I'm JD Harrison, Washington Post, and I'm wondering if you can put this into context a little bit in terms of the priority list, I guess policy priority list, if you will, for your company, for the companies you all work with, and talking with startups, innovators. It's a robust list that I hear, be it immigration reform and talent, be it some of the rules the SEC is working on right now. Do any of those other issues affect you all heavily? And is there action you're watching for in the coming year? And where does this here fit on that wish list for Washington, if you will?
From the energy storage perspective, this addresses a very specific part of the investment cycle. So it probably affects at least 20% of the folks in this space for us. So it is a high priority. We obviously also work very closely with FERC and EPA and the agencies on developing policies that will help all along the investment cycle. I mean, the electric grid has a lot of different components. Some are more risk averse than others. This addresses a particularly risk-averse segment because the electric grid is very difficult to innovate on in real time. So this will help us get those innovations out into the marketplace. And there's certainly other market drivers out there, but this will really help on the innovation side the most.
So if I can add to that, in the first 5 or 7 years of my company's existence, I did nothing but raise money. I mean, that's all I did. I spent, well, almost everything I did was raising money because it's the oxygen. It allows us to do anything at that point. So from my perspective, that is the #1 issue. If we can figure out a way of maintaining oxygen in these companies, we have a chance of solving a lot of big problems. So it is the biggest issue. It is by far the biggest issue. And it's my sense, at least in a lot of my colleagues, believe that this again will open up new investor classes in a very, very big way. And if you can do that, then you can end up solving the #1 problem. So from my perspective, and if you don't have that problem solved, all the other problems are non-existent because you don't, you're not worried about hiring people because you can't afford to, right? So it's #1.
And I'll even go a little farther. Some of the most important companies that this coalition is working on behalf of don't even exist yet because they don't have the access to this money. We're trying to open that up so that entirely new companies can be created and can have all the other problems that are on the list. Any further questions? Yes, in front.
Hi, the coalition has 3 proposals that I believe Doug had mentioned. You and I think Ed had talked about how early stage financing is an issue. Of the 3 proposals, which one would you say really would help the early stage companies? Let's just say in biotech, the preclinical phase 1, phase 2 companies.
So I believe the R&D partnerships will, again, that's the catalyst that will help bring in new investors. That's the catalyst that will keep them invested. And it can be done over a pretty long period of time, too. There should be enough headspace in that proposal that allow us to take really early stage assets and ideas and move them all the way through to human proof of concept, which is a really big milestone for all of our companies. And that should be enough money to do that. So again, of those, that's the one that is, in my estimation, the critical one, the most important one.
And I would agree with that. I mean, it's not like we're talking about something that we haven't done before. I mean, these were available in the 80s, which was actually the genesis of the biotechnology industry back in the late 70s, early 80s. I mean, these partnerships existed. I mean, and with tax reform, they went away, and we ran into some issues in access to capital. But it's not like we're talking about something new. We're talking about something that's been proven that maybe ran into some issues that were caught up with some policy issues that maybe clouded the issue. But I think the R&D partnership point of view is probably the most important.
Any last questions? Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming. Just to sum up, the Coalition for Small Business Innovators is a coalition that's made up of associations that are made up of companies that are made up of people that are trying to change the world. And it's hard to change the world. And what we're trying to do is find ways to unlock the private investment that will make that easier. That will make it easier to improve people's lives and to create jobs and really to make a difference. And we thank you for your time, your patience, your questions today. Happy to follow up on any detailed questions that you still have. And thank you again for coming.